let's talk about books. This is a pile of all the books that I've read recently. When I say recently, I mean over the span of the last several months because I've not made one of these videos in a while. So don't think that I'm the world's fastest reader. As always, I'll put links in the video description to each of these books in case you're interested. I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to go in the order that I plopped these books down. So let's start. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. This is a very well-known book. It's very Halloween-y. A lot of people like it. This is about two young boys who encounter a very strange carnival that rolls into town. I enjoyed this book, though I did struggle with the same thing that I struggled with when I read The Halloween Tree, which is also by Ray Bradbury, which is the writing is very dreamlike and you can tell that it's very unique and it's interesting and I really like it a lot. But I think the thing that gets me with both of these books is that they're about children, which is not inherently bad, but I just found that I was less interested in the characters and the plot because we were following children around. That's not to say that this is a children's book. It's written in an interesting way that a lot of adults would appreciate, and I recognize the brilliance of that writing, but it's not my new favorite book. In my last book update video, I was in the middle of The Discovery of Slowness by Sten Nadolny. This is translated from German. It was recommended by one of you below one of my previous videos. This book is about the life of Sir John Franklin, the Arctic explorer who went missing in the 1800s. It is a fictionalized account and a meditation on life, death, love, and the importance of slowness and gentleness. I really struggled with it at the beginning because I just could not get into it. Something about it really did make me feel like I was reading very slowly, but somewhere halfway through something changed within me or the writing, I don't know, and I just zipped right through to the end. Overall, I would say that it was a rewarding read, so I'm glad that I read it. And thank you again for the recommendation. Dun, dun, dun. Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. This is horror. In an attempt to make sense of his own mysterious and unsettling childhood memories, a man begins to reconstruct his past. I first read this way back when as a creepypasta. So when I was reading it, it all felt very familiar and I sort of knew what was going to happen. That being said, I enjoyed it. It left me feeling very depressed and kind of spooked, but mainly depressed. I think the writing was impressive. Because a lot of it is about his childhood, I think some of the writing might be a little too good in the moments of childhood. Like the dialogue between friends felt a little maybe too advanced, but at the same time, maybe not. Overall, I'd give this like 4 stars. Tender as the flesh. If you read a lot of horror, I'm sure you've heard of this maybe because I think it's pretty popular now, and in my opinion it's for good reason. I personally am very sensitive to spoilers. I picked this book up having only heard the name. I knew it was popular, so I decided to read it, and I think that it was cool that the plot was a surprise to me, and so I don't want to necessarily read the log line of this. I will say that it takes place in a sort of dystopian world where things are different. I thought this book gives a lot of food for thought about ethics, morality, hypocrisy, and what differentiates humans and animals. I know a lot of people who've read this book, and it leaves an impression on you. If you've read it, I'd love to know your thoughts. Psycho. This is thriller/horror. I'm sure you're familiar with the Alfred Hitchcock movie, but did you know that that movie is based on a book? I'm sure you're all familiar with the premise. This is what I would call a page turner. I read it in one day. I thought it was great. It was so fast paced, and I was amazed because it is the movie. So the movie took everything from the book and follows it so closely, and I feel like because of that, the book should be way more popular because this is where it all began. But maybe the book is way more popular than I thought it was, so what do I know? Welcome to Night Vale. It's about a town called Night Vale where very strange things happen. It's based on the hit podcast, Welcome to Night Vale, which I actually never listened to, but I knew that the podcast is about spooky stuff taking place in a town, and so I just decided to get this book and check it out. When I started the book, I was amazed at how clever the writing was. It was so funny and poignant and made me think, and I was like, this is my new favorite book. There were so many moments of just absurdity, which I thought was cool, but then eventually it became too much. I felt like it got really bogged down with how much absurd stuff was in each sentence, so that it became like hard to follow because the physics of reality stopped making sense. I made it to the end, but I think it started stronger than it finished, in my opinion, but this is coming from someone who's not necessarily a fan of the podcast, having not really ever listened to it. I think the writing is good. I think it has elements of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like that sort of absurdity, which is great in some respects, but eventually became too much for me. Will it be too much for you? Who's to say? Maybe check it out? I don't know. The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is horror. It's about a troop of boys in the Canadian wilderness who go on a camping trip, but then an unexpected intruder stumbles upon their campsite, and they're exposed to something far more frightening than any tale of terror. I have no complaints necessarily. I think the writing was good, except I just could not really bring myself to care about any of the characters or the plot, and so I didn't love it. Darren Brown's Confessions of a Conjurer. In this book, Darren Brown invites you on a whimsical journey through his unusual mind. Way back when I was in high school, no, maybe college, I became a big fan of Darren Brown. If you're unfamiliar, he's, I don't know what he's called, a mentalist? He's an English mentalist and illusionist. He has a lot of really interesting programs on TV, or had, I don't know, where he shows just how weird the mind is and how easy the mind is to take advantage of. It's always felt very interesting and smart, and like you're getting all of this forbidden knowledge about the way that the world works psychologically. I've read at least one other one of his books before and enjoyed it, but this one, there was just something about it that I didn't love. The writing was so meandering, it felt a little bit pointless, and it was missing a lot of elements of the real reason that I picked it up, which is to read about those psychological tricks and explanations of tricks and why they work and why we think the way that we do. There were maybe a couple moments of that, but everything else just felt like stream of consciousness. I don't know. So I wanted to love it. I didn't, but I still enjoy Darren Brown. So, I don't know, 3 stars? Nightmare Alley. I can't stand when the movie is the cover of the book. I knew that this was a recent film by Guillermo del Toro, but I hadn't seen the movie. I didn't know what the plot was. But then I was in a bookstore and I saw this and I picked it up and I looked, and the copyright of this book is 1946. This book is about Stanton Carlyle, who works as a carny at a traveling circus. And that's all I'll say about the plot. I went in completely blind, and I think that made the reading experience better in this case, because at no point did I have any idea where any of this was going. I think it takes skill to write a book with such an unlikable main character, but in a way that you don't get burnt out reading. Like, you still want to follow the character and know what happens. I thought the writing was really immersive, and the last line hit pretty hard. So it was a pretty captivating and stressful read, and I do recommend it. Would love to know your thoughts. Another classic, The Exorcist. Super famous movie, famous book. I felt like the writing was really energetic and fast-paced. I don't know what my expectations were, but I was pleasantly surprised. It didn't scare me, but maybe it'll scare you. I think you should check it out, and then you can say that you've read The Exorcist. So, Nothing But Blackened Teeth. This was another horror book. The back says, masterfully turning the classic haunted house story on its head, Nothing But Blackened Teeth is a sharp and devastating exploration of grief, the parasitic nature of relationships, and the consequences of our actions. I bought this book because of the cover and also because I had heard of it before. Again, I went in completely blind. Not trying to be too harsh, but I would say this is my least favorite read of the year. I really didn't like it. This is, again, just a personal opinion. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to let me know your thoughts on it. The thing I didn't like was the writing. It felt impossible to follow any action at all because it felt like we kept stopping down to get more descriptions of things that we had already gotten descriptions of. The writing felt unnecessarily flowery, which has a place, but it was very, in my opinion, ill-timed every time it happened. That's all I'll say. I did not enjoy it. I don't recommend it, but it is pretty well known. You'll see it, I think, in any horror section of any bookstore, so clearly some people like it. The Small Hand by Susan Hill. A ghost story. This is about an antiquarian bookseller who one day takes a wrong turn and stumbles upon an old Edwardian house, and when standing outside the house, he feels the unmistakable sensation of a child's hand sliding into his. When it comes to Susan Hill, I am chasing the high of The Woman in Black, which is a different one of her books. I adored The Woman in Black. It was so cozy. There were some parts that actually spooked me. I just love it. And so ever since then, anytime I see a Susan Hill book in a horror section, because I think she writes mainly mystery, but there are a few that are spooky ghost stories. So when I see them, I buy them, and then I read them, and it never is the same as The Woman in Black. That's not to say that this is bad. This is incredibly cozy. It's about an antiquarian bookseller. It's a ghost story. You could read it in half a day, I think. In my opinion, I don't know that it's her strongest story. I actually have 3 more Susan Hill books right here that I'm going to read. Next up, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. Could have sworn I talked about this already in a previous video because I read this 6 months ago. Maybe I missed it. On the back it says, before Dracula, there was Carmilla. Given that this did come before Dracula, I am surprised that this isn't more well known. There are also some very progressive themes within. So if you want to give yourself a horror literature / vampire literature education, I recommend it. Also, if you're interested in Dracula and Transylvania and Romania, check out my other videos where I went around Transylvania and looked for Dracula. Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather. I'm just going to read straight from Google. The book is about a French Catholic priest who journeys to the newly acquired territory of New Mexico after the Mexican-American War, where he must navigate the vast, unforgiving landscape and the complex cultural blend of Native American traditions and a fading Catholic faith to establish his diocese and spread the word of God. This is fiction. It's not the type of book I would necessarily pick up on my own, but it was recommended to me by one of you below one of my videos, so I thought I'd check it out. I was torn between giving this 4 and 5 stars, but ultimately I ended up going with 5. Because of the heaviness of the reflections at the end of the book, it was a really unique time and place to be transported to, so I am grateful to this book for that. Mexican Gothic. This is horror, and the book is about a glamorous socialite whose life of parties and entertainment is interrupted when she receives a frantic letter from her newlywed cousin who is begging to be rescued from a mysterious doom. I think this book is pretty popular right now. I've seen it in a lot of bookstores and online, and I did not really like it. I didn't really love the writing. It wasn't for me, that's all I'll say. Horns by Joe Hill. I had read one other Joe Hill book before this, which was Heart-Shaped Box, which I really didn't like, but I decided to pick this up, and although the subject matter is very, very stressful and upsetting, and side note, if you are sensitive to certain topics or subject matters, I'd recommend checking out the trigger warnings for this book. It was very stressful and upsetting, but at the same time, as far as writing goes and as far as books go, I found myself very engaged and caring about the characters, and I wanted to know how it all played out. I actually read this in 24 hours. So I would recommend this with that caveat attached. There are a few more, but the last one I'll talk about is the one that I'm reading right now, which is called The Fifth Child by Doris Lessing. It's about this married couple who have 4 children, and then upon having their 5th, they realize that there's something different about that 5th child. I picked this up not too long ago. I showed it in my previous video where I went to antique stores and bookstores. So I just got this, but I'm pretty far in already. I think it's really effective at showing the isolation that a mother might feel when something like this happens, when the child is different and everyone else senses it. I'm interested to see where it's going because I have no idea. So I'll do a full review when I'm done in some future video. But other than that, there you have it. I don't even know how many books this is. Let me know if you've read any of them, what you thought, and also if you happen to have any recommendations for me. I love horror or anything dark, mysterious, atmospheric, sad, melancholy. Just a good book. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Join me over on Patreon where I post exclusive videos, close-ups of antiques, and more. And yeah, thank you again, and I will see you guys soon.